Tell your story, build your brand. artmedianorthwest.com. artmedianw.com. Enjoy this conversation with Michael Callaway, part 1 of 2. Michael.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Absolutely.
When did you start learning music, and what did you listen to at the time?
I guess there's a couple of different answers I could give to that question, but
Sure.
At least I think when it in earnest happened was when I was 13 and started playing the guitar. I had done choir in elementary school, but I don't know that I really count that. Like, I definitely learned stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's funny, I've been finding myself going back to things that I learned in elementary school music class to help me teach my elementary school aged kids when I'm teaching. And
Right.
I've realized that's been pretty helpful. I teach guitar lessons.
Yes, you do.
5-Star Guitars.
You're an excellent teacher.
Well, thank you. As are you.
Oh, thanks. You're kind of in charge of keeping the lesson stuff moving smoothly, right?
In a way, yeah. I think the main official function that I have with lessons from my kind of staff capacity at the shop is making sure that those, like our VIP reservations, that those are always kind of extended out as far as they can be. So that's usually every month at the beginning of the month doing that. And then I'd say I tend to act as a bit of a shield for, certain kind of issues when people on the floor kind of get fed up with a lesson related thing. I can usually kind of swoop in there and help get things settled.
Kind of Mighty Mouse.
Well, a little bit, yeah.
So how many instruments have you dabbled with over the years?
It's mostly been guitar.
Yeah.
Based on the fact that I can play the guitar, I know where the notes are on a bass, so I can, kind of mess around with that a little bit, but I don't consider myself a bass player.
Okay.
I sing, I know where all the notes are on a keyboard, but you can ask my wife, my hand technique on the piano is apparently pretty funny. But
when did you decide to teach guitar?
The first time that I taught guitar was, so I started playing when I was 13, and I think the first actual lessons I gave were when I was 14. My best friend growing up, and still one of my best friends today, he has 2 younger brothers, and they both kind of got interested in the guitar a little after I did, and so I air quoted taught, because I could kind of just regurgitate the lessons that I was getting at the time.
Sure.
But, I realized, but it didn't go great. Neither of them played the guitar, and neither of them really stuck with it, and I think I was not the best teacher when I was 14. I think I'm a lot better now.
I'm sure you are, yeah.
But I think, in terms of really deciding that was kind of how I wanted to spend a really good amount of my time was doing Hillsborough Parks and Rec School of, now it's Camp Amp, but back then it was School of Rock.
Right.
Because that was the first real teaching job that I had, was just that summer in between, I think my first and second years at Oregon State. Joff called me and was just like, hey, you want a job for 2 weeks teaching? Because apparently they were short on guitar teachers, and so he called me in, and I think I did all right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Do you prefer original or cover bands for your own enjoyment and as far as what you like to play?
For playing, I enjoy both. I've definitely spent the majority of my band experience playing in bands that were writing original songs. Maybe did a cover here or there, but, primarily we're working on originals. When I was in college, there were a couple of little kind of jazz combos that I did with some friends that, those were exclusively covers. They weren't any original music. And that was fun too.
Were they jazz standards or?
Some of them were.
Okay.
And then we kind of branched out from there. We would do Chameleon, but then we'd kind of branch out into doing some Stevie Wonder tunes that are great. I wouldn't necessarily call them jazz standards.
Right.
Or 25 or 6 to 4 by Chicago is one that I remember.
It's kind of rock, but it's got that horn section. Did the place and time that you grew up have an impact on how you learned?
I think so. I think I grew up in Hillsborough, not too far from here, and so it was, cool kind of being, not too far from the city, so that, those big kind of monumental acts, were still within reach and not a 4 or 5 hour drive to and from.
Right.
But, just 30 minutes down 26 and then probably spending 20 minutes finding parking.
That's always fun.
But I think it definitely had an impact, especially too, just like if it wasn't for living in this area, I wouldn't have had the teachers that I've had. I would have had different teachers, and it probably still would have worked out fine, but I'm certainly very grateful for the teachers and the musicians that I've gotten to work with.
What mentors did you have along the way that come to mind?
Yeah, so it was funny. I was trying to do a mental list of all the teachers that I've had that I can remember, because the first place that I did lessons at was What's Up Music on Main Street in Hillsborough, which is now, I think, an art supply shop. And they kind of not leased out, but they kind of contracted out their lesson space to, I believe it was American Guitar Academy, which I think was run by a guy named Andy. And I had a lot of really great teachers there, but it was, I didn't really have a lot of consistency from one teacher to another. Like, I never had any of those teachers for, longer than 4 or 5 months, and then just, stuff would kind of happen. Like, they'd graduate high school and go off to college, and then they weren't around anymore. But I can remember my very first guitar teacher was a woman named Christine, but I cannot remember her last name for the life of me. Then I remember having a guy named James, and I remember him because he taught me this little bit of the Master of Puppets solo. Like, this was before I even listened to Metallica or really cared who they were, but it was like that little I still know how to play that.
Yeah,
but
it's a cool piece.
Yeah. And then I had I think the teacher I had for the longest there was a guy named Andrew Magnuson, who actually just lived like right down the street from me growing up anyways, and he was a really great teacher, and I think he's still playing around. But then I think the two biggest kind of musical or guitar mentors that I had probably came with, Joff at 5 Star Guitars and Neil Grandstaff at Oregon State. I think Joff was the first teacher to really get me to understand how important the musicality was, and really get me to kind of focus my energy on doing more practical things to make everything better, as opposed to just going home and learning this song and then learning that song.
Can you talk about what you mean by the musicality?
I did not know how to read music, like a lick of music, for probably about the first 3 or so years of my playing. And when I was taking lessons with Joff, that was where I first started to learn music theory. And he was the teacher. He wasn't the first teacher who told me I should learn to read music, but he was the one who got me to learn how to read music. He was the first one to get me to really play with a metronome, because I think the very first time I did it, I just did not have the internal sense of rhythm that I thought I had, and I think it bruised my ego pretty hard. So I was just like, this is clearly useless, trying to just shield the thoughts of like failure and embarrassment. But I just didn't have rhythm.
You're not the only guitar player to ever face that. I can tell you.
Certainly
You're
not.
in good company, man.
Well, and now when I teach lessons and I get to a point where I'm working with metronomes or telling a student to go home and work with a metronome, I'm like, just be prepared. If it doesn't feel good while you're doing it, just kind of work through it. If you're having trouble sticking to it, just keep going. It's not going to be immediately easy, but the more you do it, it'll become a lot simpler to do and a lot easier to keep along with.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, and then getting into music theory, he was the very first teacher I had who really got me into music theory, which I'm so grateful for, because I love music theory.
Yeah.
And
it's pretty awesome.
It's incredible.
It's one thing about that as a guitar player is the way that it's taught at the university and in schools is not what we use on the guitar necessarily all the time. Like the 4-part Bach chorale style SATB, like you're really not doing those kind of voice leading principles right now as a guitar player.
No,
like parallel fifths are cool.
Right. Yeah. That was one of the funniest things. I remember, I think that was either the year I was at PCC or the year that my first year at Oregon State doing theory. But I just remembered like learning that kind of, voice leading 101, parallel fifths and octaves, bad.
Right.
Like not allowed. And then when I kind of realized what those were on the guitar,
Right.
it's like,
Wait a minute, I'm using
this
these
is
all the time.
most of what I do.
Yeah, exactly.
This is almost exclusively what I do. Yeah, but getting me to learn how to read music, I think was a big thing, and it's also something that I've taken with me and recognized that it's like, if there's something that a student doesn't want to learn, they're not going to learn it unless I show them why it's valuable to know it. Because for me, the very first time back when I was at lessons with AGA, and again, those were lessons with, kids who were, 17, 18 years old. And so I think in terms of like, really having command over, like, we're going to learn this, it was just kind of like, I don't want to do that. All right, we'll do this instead. Which is not a bad thing necessarily.
Right.
But, my internal logic when I was like, I'm not going to learn how to read music was, I've already learned how to play a couple of like Kiss and AC/DC songs from tab, so this just seems like a waste of time.
Right.
Like, I've already gotten that figured out.
Right.
That took like 20 minutes to figure out, the basics of tab. This is like learning new stuff. Like this, no.
Right. Yeah.
But
why?
yeah. And so I remember when I was getting towards the end of high school with my lessons with Joff, I got a lot more serious about the idea of studying music in college. And, so I shared that with him at the beginning of the lesson, and I think his, probably not verbatim, but what I remember his response was, "That's great, bud, gotta learn how to read." So that was what we did that day, and I was like, okay, like, I need to do this, and I can't put it off anymore.
Nope.
So let's do it.
Yeah. No, it's a big part of it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know the joke, right? How do you get a guitar player to turn down?
You put sheet music in front of him.
There you go.
And how do you get him to run out of the room screaming? He's got to play, and like, we're going on. You're playing that. You got no time to prepare.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, and I'm an awful sight reader.
Well, there's apparently drummers wake up in a cold sweat in fear of having to play the black page, which is a Frank Zappa thing, I believe.
Okay.
Which is like, it's called the black page because it's largely covered in ink. It's a lot of stuff to to count and read and everything.
For sure.
Yeah, so you should look that up.
Yeah.
Or have you seen the Fairies Air and Death Waltz?
No,
That's
not.
hilarious. So look that up when you get a chance.
Absolutely.
In your opinion, what are some of the best ways that someone could learn how to develop the skills that you've cultivated?
I think lessons are a great way to start. I think it's obviously going to vary from person to person because, what works for, one person isn't necessarily going to work for another. But I think education generally is a pretty good way to go with understanding most things, whether it's skill building or kind of conceptual stuff. I think, education is a really important part of that. I think for every great kind of self-taught musician, there's like 19 awful ones who just didn't have anyone to, be there to be like, that's flat.
At least 19 of them.
Yeah, right?
Maybe more.
And I think especially for me as a guitar player, and especially, being the guitar player that I was the first couple of years of playing where I just really didn't have any musical literacy, then I kind of took that on, when I went into music school as this kind of chip on my shoulder of I'm the idiot who decided to go into music school with the guitar, and all these other people, know how to read and whatever. So like I gotta, work extra hard to show that like musically I know what's happening.
Right.
Because it's really easy to get reasonable technical skill on the guitar without really understanding the musicality of it.
Sure.
Or at least getting enough of a technical skill that you feel like you're really good.
Well, I think also it's important that there are different ways to learn, right? So if you didn't go to the university for music, but you spent twice as much time practicing and you played along with like every record you could find at the library even, you'd be awesome. Like Hendrix and the Beatles were awesome. They didn't read.
No, exactly.
But they spent a lot of time on it,
Well, and that was the thing, was they wouldn't necessarily to be able to speak that musicality necessarily, or maybe they, like, I don't know, I've never talked to them, but yeah, at least from those kind of general stereotypes and kind of understanding,
sure,
Hendrix might not have known to call a Hendrix chord a 7 sharp 9,
right?
But he didn't need to. Like, it was, even if you can't speak the theoretical behind it, he could hear it and he could articulate it really cleanly. And I think that was the thing for me, was that I was not good at that. I needed to learn kind of that harmonic structure before I understood the reason that everything I'm writing right now sounds the same is because everything is going 1 to 4. So I need to try something different, because when I'm just going off of quote unquote feel, I keep doing the same thing over and over.
Right.
So I need to,
Spice it up a little, try something different.
yeah, I need to be able to go over to the bookshelf and see that there's something else to read.
Sure.
Something else I can try. And, maybe it's not going to work. Maybe if I go to from the 1 to the 5 instead, and maybe that's not right for that song, maybe it's perfect for that song.
Yeah. Could be a pop song.
Yeah. So I think, education lessons, but I think however you're going to go about learning those skills, like really going into it, because I can compare, as much as I can find all the little bad habits that I've had over the course of my being involved with music. Learning how to draw was something that 3 or 4 times in my life I wanted to do, and then I just didn't enjoy it enough to put in the passion that it required.
Yeah, it takes a lot.
Yeah.
Because you're training your hands to do
Right.
things that you want to see,
Right.
And it's the same with a guitar
Yeah.
or with an instrument, Yeah.
And I think it's just a lot more sonically fun to just slam on the open strings as opposed to just take a pen and just kind of scribble everywhere and just see what kind of cacophonous mess you've come up with.
Right, yeah. You have to make a lot of messes before it starts sounding good or looking like something. How should people go about finding their passion or starting their creative life?
That's a good question.
Yeah. It could be.
Yeah. I think, in terms of finding your passion, I think just trying a bunch of different things, which is funny for me to say because I'm just so not that person.
Well, you maybe didn't have to go about it that
Right.
way,
I didn't have to go about it that way, but, if you can't just kind of find it cohesively and naturally, trying a bunch of different things. And as far as starting your creative life, I think, it's kind of hard for me to say, because when I started playing the guitar, it was just this thing that I did. It was just this thing that I did that I enjoyed, that I really was really, really into. And so I didn't really have a, start necessarily as much as, I got a guitar, was in lessons and just playing whatever I felt like. But yeah, in terms of starting your creative life, I think setting time aside to do it, because even now, doing music, and it's not the thing that I do after I've come home from school to unwind. It's a very big part of the work that I do, that I come home from. So I think my relationship with it has changed in that sense, but
Sure.
But I've found that when I do set that time aside, it's, a lot easier to hold myself accountable to that, as opposed to like get home and eat dinner and then I'm just kind of like, it'd be really nice to just kind of sit on the couch and watch some TV and not really do anything. But, making that kind of commitment to put time into it, I think is really valuable, and just equipping yourself with the knowledge and skills you think you need to know to have it. As you find your passion and are starting your creative life, if you find people who, inspire you or do the things that you want to do and do them way better than you do right now, like those are people to introduce yourself to and, make their acquaintance, because like that was the very first thing I heard in a guitar shop when I was going to get a guitar, was surround yourself with musicians who are better than you.
Yeah.
So I always kind of make the joke, it's like strive to be the worst person in your band.
That's a good place to be, right?
Yeah, but because it tied into, there was a quote from I think it was Sports Night, it was an Aaron Sorkin show, but one of the like managerial people, he had a quote that was, if you're stupid, surround yourself with smart people. If you're smart, surround yourself with smart people who disagree with you. and I love that idea, that it's just like, if you want to get better at the thing, surround yourself with people who are better at the thing. If you feel like you've gotten really good at whatever it is you're trying to do, surround yourself with people who do it in different ways or go
Right.
about it in different ways.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can go about that.
They say that in all the business books and courses too. It's like if you're the smartest if you're running a business and you're the smartest person in that business, you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
Like you definitely want people smarter than you working for you doing
Yeah.
stuff. How has technology changed music and the creative arts?
I would say profoundly. Yeah, it's been such an interesting kind of time to, come into like now just firmly adulthood, like past young adulthood is just adulthood now. Because yeah, when I started playing guitar, YouTube didn't exist yet, which is weird to think about.
It is, yeah.
But tab sites did exist, and that was a huge thing for me. Like,
Sure.
The lesson where I kind of learned what tab was and how to read it is like I went home and I pulled up a tab for like 50 different songs that like that day I was just, and of course I had been playing for a couple of weeks at this point, so I was pulling open like Deuce by Kiss, and could get like a little bit of it, but it was something. It was something,
right?
And then I remember one of the first ones that I did that was like super easy was there's this song by Kiss called War Machine. Kiss was the band that got me into the guitar, like, and so that's where a lot of those early experiences are going to be kind of wrapped around that band. But there's a song War Machine that I think was on Creatures of the Night, but I saw them do it live a couple months after I'd started playing the guitar. But it's this really simple riff that drives the intro and the chorus, and it's just all E string stuff, and like I've used that in lessons to demonstrate tab because it's just this like bum 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 bum. So it's like mostly open E hits with just moving your fingers down to the seventh and back to the fifth, down to the third, back to the fifth. So it's it's like that was one that I was like, oh my gosh, I can do the thing. This is great. This is great. But I think in terms of like how I've gotten to learn the instrument, and even still to this day, it's like now YouTube exists, and there's so much music to find everywhere, and there's so many different people online who are just like, let me teach you, like here's my YouTube channel or here's my website, and let me show you all the things you need to know about being a guitar player. And I think that's super cool. And I think it's a really nice supplement to, those kind of individual one-on-one lessons. Because, the thing that the joke I always make is, like, the YouTube video won't tell you when you're out of tune.
Right.
Unless your ear can pick up on the fact that you're really out of tune.
Right. Or when you're bending the strings if you're playing a chord or something and it sounds sharper.
No, absolutely. Like, and I think just in terms of, media consumption, listening to music is just such a different experience now, because I was in middle school when I got really into music, and so I had my Discman and my headphones, like the ones that were like over ear but then they didn't wrap around the top of your head, they would kind of go behind.
Sure. I remember those.
Yeah. They were great, except they were really uncomfortable and sounded like crap, but they were great. Nostalgia, right?
Right.
But
exactly.
So I'd just be walking to school with like 3 or 4 different jewel case CD cases, in my backpack, which of course all got destroyed, but the CDs were okay. Right. So it was, lots of walking to school and listening to stuff, and then, getting an iPod, and it was like, now I don't have to break all those jewel cases.
Right.
I can break this instead. No. But I do think there's also a certain bit of a detachment that I've felt, just like it, I can remember
with the iPod as opposed to,
well, and with, MP3s and streaming and stuff. And it's not I wouldn't say it's an inherently bad thing. It's a thing that I miss, that sensation of going into, a store that, whether it was like a proper like record store or just the CD section at Fred Meyer or Target, but, kind of sifting through and then seeing something that piqued your interest, and then, grabbing that and having it. And, if it was, depending on the car you were driving in, because, it was back when not all the cars that, my family would have had CD players in it, and now probably none of them do because they don't need them. But, doing, like getting to listen to it like on the drive home, and like getting that little taste of like tracks 1, 2, and 3, and then, going home and popping it in the stereo for, 4 through however long it was, or just having to sit there, studying the album art, maybe looking through the lyric book.
That's another thing, is just, the album art is sort of a lost thing now in a lot of ways, which is, that used to be a big part of it. Yeah. And sometimes people, like listening to an A side of a record and a B side of a record and stuff like that, and then like looking at the liner notes and kind of learning about the songs and the craft of how it all came together.
At the same time, it's like, I think I'll try to keep it short because I could go on and on about this topic, because I had a couple of different papers I did in college for different classes that were kind of centered around this idea. But, you know, as I think the biggest kind of double-edged sword with it, as someone who's, you know, wanting to make a career in music, is it's never been easier to get your music published and available for consumption that is at the fingertips of billions of people. It's also never been harder to get anyone to give a care about it, you know, because it's
true, man.
yeah, and it's that kind of thing where, you know, and how it's affected genre, where you can get really hyper focused with tastes now,
Right.
you know, when, you know, because like, yeah, growing up it was like I was listening to mostly, you know, top 40 radio when I was a, you know, a kid, and then, you know, when I got into Kiss, that kind of gave way to getting into lots of classic rock, and then, you know, from there it's just kind of expanded out all across the board. You know, there's really not any genres I can think of off the top of my head that like I haven't been able to find a song that I can find valuable, that I can find enjoyment out of. But yeah, it's just everybody's in the game now.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to, because yeah, I mean, you know, we're recording this right now on a, you know, a really great but simple setup, and I mean, we grab my phone, record something on voice recorder of just us singing off key or whatever, put it up online, and we just recorded and published a song in a couple of minutes. Now, it wasn't a good song.
Right.
Like,
Right.
you know, to make something really good, you know, you have to sift through all this
Sure.
stuff now. And I think for me, I haven't adjusted and adapted to it very well, where I've had a much harder time kind of finding new music that I can really get excited about. But I think some of it too is just, it's kind of like with Netflix, when it's like there's so many things to choose from,
Right.
you just end up not choosing anything, or you just choose the thing
Whatever.
that or the thing that, you know, it's, you know, it's like I'll pull up Spotify and you just look through all these artists, and it's like, you know, haven't heard of them. Oh no, nothing's really grabbing me. I'll just go listen to Appetite for Destruction again. Like, it's fine. Like, I know I enjoy that, and I'll
Right.
enjoy it still.
Sure. Sure.
But yeah,
Nice. What is a song or album that you would recommend listening to?
I've really come to, there are specific singer-songwriters who I've really come to enjoy over the last decade or so. You know, Warren Zevon was someone who a friend had recommended to me when I was like 15 or 16, and listened to a couple of songs and really didn't get it, and then heard one of his songs on like a TV show, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. So then I, you know, went and found it, and so yeah, his self-titled one is, I love that album. Excitable Boy is incredible too. Those are the two that if, you know, he's got this unbelievable ability to, you know, in one song, you know, kind of just have these like really kind of vague but very rooted in history kind of, you know, ballad songs. Like his self-titled opens with the Ballad of Frank and Jesse James, and it's just, you know, a song about Frank and Jesse James, you know, the Outlaws, but kind of, I hesitate to say from a sympathetic view, but from a more like not viewing them as, you know, the Outlaws bad, but just kind of like as the outlaws who were, you know, people, and people are complicated. And then, you know, on a dime he'll turn, and it'll just be like this really grotesque dark humor that I kind of love too. And then, you know, the next track he might just be like tugging at your heartstrings with something just really heartfelt and beautiful, and it never feels jarring to go from one to the next. He's able to really do all these different things, you know, from a lyrical standpoint. From a musical standpoint, a lot of it's 1-4-5.
Yeah.
Which, it's funny, there are some songs where I look them up and it's like, oh, it's, you know, it's 1-4-5, you know, meaning it, like it's a really simple chord progression. But then there's other ones that I look them up or try to learn them by ear, and I expect them to be something so much more nuanced or complicated, and then it's just that. And so and then I end up having like a lot more respect for it, because I'm like, how did you get something so awesome out of, you know, chords that have just been, you know, beaten to death by so many, and for good reason. Like, they sound good.
Well,
Like,
I think of that when I listen to like bluegrass players play.
Yeah.
Because they're playing G, C, and D, and they are doing a lot of interesting, fascinating stuff with it. And it's just like, man, I play those chords, and I don't know how you're finding all that nuance in there. It's amazing.
Another singer-songwriter I really like is Leon Russell, who I did have the fortune to go see him live, I think 3 times before he died. But, he just, like, he's kind of the guy in the shadows on so many just incredible records from the 60s and the 70s. Like, he played keys on, like, this is not an example of, like, oh, if you want to understand Leon Russell, go listen to this. He was the keys player on Monster Mash.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
Which...
That actually is a kind of a cool keyboard part.
It's fascinating just because it's like you don't expect him to turn up there, but he turns up everywhere when you just comb like the personnel and the
His
liner notes
discography kind of thing,
like he led Joe Cocker's Mad Dogs and Englishmen band, which is really cool, and all his solo stuff is great. As far as kind of more like kind of local people and whatever, Love Sloth is great. The album they put out is really cool. There's a band that that Nathan worked with them more closely in Corvallis, but they were called the Macks, Macks, which they always spell that out at their shows to make sure people know how to spell it. But they're really cool. There's probably more that are going to come to me that I'm just going to blurt them out. Like
there you go, randomly.
Later. Yeah.
Like you're a Tourette's music person or something.
It's more of just that it's like it's kind of that thing of like having the perfect comeback a day later.
Oh yeah.
It's
that's the only time it comes to me, I think. Yeah. Is creativity or skill more important as an artist?
I think it's a really good question. It is a little bit chicken and egg in the sense that and I think it kind of depends on what you want to do. If you want to be this conceptual artist like Yoko Ono-esque, it's not that I'm going to say there's a lack of skill there, but there's certainly a surplus of creativity, like
Sure.
And so if that's the kind of thing that you're wanting to do, then I would say creativity is probably more important there. If it was like I'm wanting to be in this speed metal band or play neo funk fusion jazz, whatever, like really intricate stuff, like if you don't have the skill, it's going to be really hard to keep up there. But I think if you're at one of those ends, and pretty well, like you feel way more in the skill technique, like you got that down, but the creativity part doesn't come, or you're on the flip side of that, it always kind of has to come back to meet in that middle.
Yeah.
Because even if I think it was James Hetfield talking about the Black Album where he said, that was, we kind of realized that it's like no matter what we do, there's always going to be someone who comes along who's going to be faster than us.
Sure.
And, so if we can't be the fastest, like if we can't be the best at being fast, what can we be the best at,
right.
And
Spinal Tap was already England's loudest band. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
But so for me, it's like, I think one of them without the other can be pretty dull.
Right.
But I think it's, if you feel like you're more on one side than the other, work to get that other one better. And, I've definitely gone through that where I think when I was younger and I didn't really have a whole lot of skill, I think I had an easier time being creative or being kind of uninhibited with, creating ideas, not knowing as much about, when I try an idea, kind of being able to recognize like that I should just move on from it. Now I'm certainly a much better guitar player, technically, and in some ways creatively too. But I don't have that lack of inhibition of like just kind of jumping into
just
an idea.
Trying stuff.
Yeah, or at least trying something and not immediately rejecting it because it's like, oh, that sucked.
Yeah. Sometimes those things suck just because they're almost there,
right.
And they really don't suck. They're really kind of awesome,
Mm-hmm.
but they're just not quite awesome yet.
Yeah.
What are some difficult times that you faced as an artist?
I think other than being a teenager and not being as good as I thought I was and, getting those ego slaps and kind of receding into myself when I, having those moments. I think right after I graduated college was pretty tough. I'd gotten my music degree, which was, again, a huge accomplishment for me, and it was that, that chip on my shoulder that I had, all the way through that music program. And I wasn't the only guitar player in there. I don't want to give off that impression. There were plenty of other people doing the guitar, but I was just that mangy kid in the AC/DC t-shirt who was crashing the music theory course or the intro to Western music history. So I graduated, and that was like a really cool big thing. I stuck around Corvallis for a year while I was waiting for my wife Mariah to finish up her schooling and graduate. She was my fiance back then. Now we're married, and but a big part of why I stayed in Corvallis too was my college band, which was called Black Market Bargain. And I think the tough thing with that was between like I had a really tough time finding work.
Not a lot of work in Corvallis, I don't think.
No, and and it was the kind of thing that I remembered a lot of people while I was in college, like faculty and staff, telling me that it's like, as long as you have a 4-year degree, it's like you're usually pretty fine, which nuh-uh, that was not the experience I had. It was like, I always kind of related it to the like, I'd pull up a Craigslist ad, entry-level position, 5 years experience required, of just that kind of like, I can't get the experience because I can't get the job because I don't have the experience that I can't get. So, I was dealing with that, and the Black Market Bargain, which was the band that kind of, Crystal and Mexico City, those were songs that got their start in that band that I had with Nathan. There were 5 of us in the band, and then I graduated, and then in the span of like the next couple of months, it went from the 5 of us to just Nathan and I. And just from our drummer moved to Seattle, and then our bass player moved to Eugene, and he was still going to try and make it work, but he was doing like Dish TV installs, I think, and his schedule was super erratic, so he just could not make a regular practice schedule. And then our singer moved to Yakima, Washington, because his fiance was doing a program, I think, at the Wazoo campus out there, and and I think he'd gotten laid off from his job in Corvallis, so like really didn't have any reason to stay. And so it was just almost a year of just not being in a band, like still being in a like still working on stuff with Nathan, but not having a job, and just not really kind of being able to like I just gotten that music degree and I was so excited about it, and then I had nothing I could do with it.
It's just like a gut punch right
away.
away.
Yeah, and so I definitely was dealing with a lot of depression at that time, and I've had depression for years. It's just something that I have, but that year was particularly difficult in spite of the fact that I also got engaged around that time, and my wife graduated college, and then we got to move up here, which was nice. And then, things kind of got rolling up here, but it was just really hard just kind of being at home every day with all the free time in the world, and then just applying to job after job and not hearing back. Like what I was teaching a few hours a week at a place in Albany, and then at a place in Tigard. Like I just drive up because it was a teaching job I could get anywhere. But I'd say that was probably the toughest time. I mean, I think, being in a band, it's always, there's always those difficulties of just,
Sure.
Trying to manage 5 schedules and 5 personalities and,
Yeah.
5 sets of wants and desires. But that kind of comes with the territory. It's a lot easier to for me to adapt to that, but just that kind of like having all that kind of time and not being able to find things to do with it, and then not feeling motivated to do anything with it. Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah.
But you made it through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how have you learned to overcome adversity?
I think it generally is going to be kind of specific to whatever the adversity is. But, in general, I think it's a Yogi Berra quote. Maybe it's not. It was the 90% of life is showing up. It was one that my dad was a big fan of.
Yeah.
And particularly, when I was in high school, my depression was really bad, and like my freshman and sophomore years were basically just kind of lost. I probably was in school as many days as I wasn't.
Wow.
And
It's a tough age for kids. You know?
yeah, no, for sure. And, and I think for me, I didn't really understand that it was like depression. Because one, I just didn't really understand what that was. But two, I just kind of also understood that kind of trope of like, moody, mopey teenagers and, kind of all that stuff. And so that was the kind of thing that I think my dad especially like drilled that quote into my head, just because like 90% of my life at that time was not showing up. But it has been that kind of thing, is that it's like if I can, will myself to get going, it tends to go all right. I mean, I think even like when I went to music school at Oregon State, I'd done a year at PCC before I transferred over to Oregon State, and so I did music theory there, and that was kind of one to get my GPA back up, because again, freshman, sophomore years were pretty rough. I got mostly A's and a few B's my junior and senior years, and I still didn't even crack a 2.8 on my GPA. Like freshman and sophomore years were rough. And so I did a year at PCC to get my GPA up, but also to see like, okay, I want to try and take like a real college music course, and if I can, hack it there, I'll get a music degree as opposed to getting a business degree while I do music stuff. And in hindsight, a business degree probably wouldn't have been so bad, but
yeah, I think all musicians should learn business, and all artists for that matter.
Yeah. But so when I got to Oregon State, that first week in that music program, I had just gotten put into second year theory because I had done a year of theory at PCC, but definitely got into a lot of different stuff. So was super overwhelmed by like, the first time that I was in, second year theory, and kind of hearing like going through the syllabus, and here's all the things that we are going to do and, need to know how to do. And I'm just kind of looking down this list, and I'm like, I did so few of these at PCC. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And then, doing a jazz improv class with Neil Grandstaff, where, again, it was just kind of hammering home that idea of like, how am I going to do this? He's such a sweetheart. If you stick around for the whole class, at first he can feel really intimidating because he's very serious, and he's unbelievably talented. He's just unbelievable on the guitar. But it was the kind of thing where I kept showing up and things got better. And I think that's the thing, is that when things are really hard to do, it can get really easy to just not want to do them. And I mean, and again, like I've had depression, for a while, and so there are some days where it's like I just literally can't get out of bed, like I just can't do it. But talking through stuff with Neil Grandstaff, like that first day in jazz improv, which is kind of big group of a bunch of musicians, and we just kind of go through jazz charts, which again, that was the first time I looked at a jazz chart.
Right.
And
wait, minus means minor?
It's like, okay, I know what a G7 is, but I don't get this triangle that you've put between them. I don't know what that is. Right. And so it was like, I was getting super intimidated by just kind of everything. But then as we finished that first jazz improv class, I was kind of walking out. I don't know if Neil had just kind of done it just to be nice or whatever, or if he saw that like I was just deer in the headlights and just not hanging on for a lot of the songs that we did, but he was just like, hey, looking forward to seeing you on Thursday, which, the next day we're going to have the class, and, keep coming back. And just that kind of encouragement, from someone who was like, had also just demonstrated, was like, how much time and effort really needs to be put into this to do this well. And I remember he had a thing that he said that first day, which was, if you sign up for this for easy, that was probably his guitar class actually. But either way, with regards to music, he would say, don't sign up for this if you think it's going to be easy, because it's not. If you want easy, there's calculus classes you can go take. And because he was like, and people might not think calculus is easy, but like, you've got reliable,
it's a little more clear.
It's a lot more concrete and really rigid rules, whereas jazz is spelled IZZ, right? It's another thing that he liked. It was a bumper sticker he saw that he always liked to talk about, that he just loved it. But so yeah, it was just that, just showing up day after day, it was, really important, and it's not always easy, and like I can't always do it, but I've found that when I really can just be there, it tends to make the thing get easier.
I think there's a thing called being present too that can help. So it's not only being there, but being there is a good start. But then
Yeah.
being present where you're just
Right.
like sort of open to what's going to happen, even if it's a beat down, which in jazz classes
Right.
it often
Oh.
is, because it's,
Oh, yeah.
it's not quite like Whiplash.
I was just about to say, yeah, never got a chair thrown
Right.
at me.
No.
Nor did I ever get slapped to tell me if I was rushing or behind.
Right.
God, J.K. Simmons is so good.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Being there is not I'm physically in the space, but I'm like on my phone playing Angry Birds.
Right.
You know, God, that people even still play that anymore.
I don't know.
I don't know
I
either.
really am out of the loop
Yeah.
as far as games on phones
Yeah,
goes.
fair enough. Me too.
All right. What's funny is one of my teachers at Portland State, Brian Johansson, gave us a syllabus for, at the time the class was called Harmonic and Structural Analysis.
Cool.
And he gave us a false syllabus the first day that had a
Okay.
bunch of names of things that we weren't going to do. And everybody's looking and reading all of these things and has these really confused, because we were,
Yeah.
you had to be a third or fourth year student to get into that
Yeah.
class. And nothing was really ringing a bell.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Yeah.
what is this? Like,
Right.
and he just started laughing after like a minute or so of everybody just looking like completely perplexed.
Yeah.
And he's like, just kidding. Here's the real syllabus. And then he handed that out.
I had a teacher kind of did that. Kind of probably not along the same lines, but where I thought that was going kind of made me think of this. It was Sam Kincaid, who was kind of running the like audio recording and engineering program. There's like a 3-term kind of the whole year series course that you can do. And the first term is entirely online, and it's really dry of just reading these chapters out of the textbook and then taking a chapter test. Like, it was monotonous. I hated it. It was just not my idea of a good time. And so then, I did the next term where it's like we're actually in a classroom. There's, digital audio workstations in front of us. Like, we're at, computers. Pro Tools is up. It's great. And, or it might have been Logic. I think it was Pro Tools. And so I asked him, I was like, that first term was like really dry and just not enjoyable at all. And he's just like, yeah. It's like, I get about 100 people who sign up for, that first term, and we do not have close to that amount of like places to kind of have them, stationed to kind of work on stuff. And he was like, yeah, usually about 100 people sign up for that first term, about 10 sign up for the second term, and that's about the room we have. So kind of helps figure out like who really wants to do this, because
Wow.
you can't do that class unless you go through that slog of a textbook, which like it was all relevant, useful information, but it's like there were 4 or 5 chapters about like room dimensions and how those affect sound in it, and it's important stuff.
Yeah.
But that was where I kind of understood audio engineering is not going to be where my skill
Focus
set
is.
and expertise lies.
Right?
But
Yeah.
no, the other 2 terms were super fun. Like I still talk to Sam. He I think he lives nearby.
Cool.
And I see him in the shop from time to time. So yeah,
Nice.
good dude. I like him.
So how should people develop their art and their vision? Yeah, if they're going to be an artist, or if that's going to be part of it anyways.
Yeah, I think as far as art, figure out kind of what you want your vision to be, and and it's be firm with it but not rigid in terms of like, again, especially if you're doing something creative with other people, it's not mine, it's ours, right?
Right.
The same way that a relationship isn't about what I want and need, but it's about what we want and need. And so if you're gonna do it with other people, be prepared to compromise on like that vision, and also be prepared to be confronted with ideas that are better than yours, which can be a little bit of an ego bruise, especially if it happens like 8 times in a row where you're just like, now I'm just kind of like,
What am I doing here?
I'm just gonna strum here in the
Right.
back, But yeah, and I think that was a big thing, because again, talking about when I was in high school, having this very specific idea of what I wanted to do, where it was like, the name Black Market Bargain was one that I came up with, I think, right at the end of high school, and I had the first couple of albums planned out of like, here's what they're gonna be. A couple of them had names. One of them was, I had a concept album that I wrote when I was going through high school that, you know, has largely since been abandoned because I think the concept, what it ended up being was just, there's some songs here, but Michael's really not great at tying them all together. But there's some good ideas in there that have actually made their way into Mr. Pink songs. Like not none of them like the full thing all the way through, but
sure, just like an idea.
Yeah, you know, there's this one thing that's in a song we do now that this really pretty kind of like A major 7 to E major thing that, you know, that ended up being a kind of middle 8 or middle 16 of a song we had, which like, you know, had it not been for me just trying it one day and, well, having remembered that song existed earlier in the day, kind of playing through it and remembering how a lot of it went, then playing that other song later in the day with, you know, my band, and then kind of just throwing one of those ideas right into the middle of it. And I was like, oh, that's what it needed. Like, but I think, you know, so being compromising with your vision, because like Black Market Bargain put out no albums, and that concept album wasn't even a thing I brought forward because, you know, a couple of years had passed, and I just kind of realized that, well, it didn't kind of fit the mutual vision of what we wanted to do, and I didn't really think there was a way to kind of properly augment it to make it fit that. It was just going to be, and again, like as I got older and smarter, more musically literate, I could find more things that were things that I was willing to overlook when I was younger, and then as I got older, could kind of realize like, that's really not good. Like that one, that one that the A major 7 to E thing. The chorus was C to G to A minor, and then I became, like, I got more into Skynyrd, and the song Simple Man comes on, and I'm like, oh my god, that's the chorus to that song. Like, not anymore, it's not.
Well, but then you can play with the timing.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And
I've
I've done that too, but I think, you know, yeah, being willing to compromise, but also, yeah, being flexible to change within yourself, you know, not getting so, you know, rootly rigid in your own idea without allowing yourself to kind of examine it and give it, you know, deeper thought.
Yeah, I think leaving like a little breathing room with an idea is cool. How well does society or the system work for people, for musicians and creative artists, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's certainly a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I think
we're looking for your wisdom.
Yeah.
Your insights
I'm looking for it too.
Yeah. Well.
But, you know, growing up, my dad was a elementary school principal for the majority of my childhood. So I, you know, have a very strong affinity and respect for, you know, education. And I mean, he was incredible at his job and, you know, connected with so many people that it's like, you know, there are definitely flaws in the system for sure, but, you know, there are definitely people in there who do their best, you know, kind of with what they have and do make some really positive impact. I think that is one of my biggest things with, you know, without steering too far into like a heavy political discussion.
Sure.
You know, I think there's so many issues that probably wouldn't be issues as much if we, you know, really invested in education and really making that a powerful thing that really helps kind of prepare people for life, where like, first time I did taxes, I wish I had a tax class in high school. I would have hated it. Like, I would have hated it, but I would have looked back on it as as an older person and been like, you know what? That was useful information. The same way that I hated typing classes when I was, you know, in 8th grade and 9th grade. But, you know, then a couple of years ago, I did like a kind of words per minute test, and it was like double what I could ever have done when I was in high school. And I was just like, oh, that stuck in there, and it got better with practice. But I think for musicians and creative artists, you know, I think it's certainly tough. And again, I do think it's kind of situational, where it's like I've had teachers who were, you know, super liberating with, you know, kind of creativity and creating space for creating stuff and being flexible with that. You know, and I've also had some teachers who I really didn't care for. I think there are improvements that can be made, but again, I don't think I'm smart enough to be the one to pick like the specific improvements that should be made. I think that's the wisdom that I have, is that I'm not that wise, but I know this.
That's important. You know, it's important to know where your strengths are.
Although you can have some conversations with me where it will seem like I've forgotten that statement that I just made.
Yeah, same for me. Yeah. How well do schools prepare kids for the real world?
In some ways pretty well, in some ways not. Like, I think, it's a lot easier to deal with kind of a 5-day work week because that's been my entire life pretty much, has been, doing school for 5 days a week and then having a 2-day weekend. And so, I mean, at least if this is the world that I'm going to be in, it prepared me pretty well for that. Now, should the work week or the school week be 5 days or 4 days or 6 days or whatever? I don't know. 5 seems all right. But if that's kind of what we have, I think I was prepared decently for that. I think in some ways my generation was very much sold on the idea of like, you're going to go to college, you're going to get a degree, and then you'll, be able to find a job, no problem. And it's just not the world that we've entered. It's not the adulthood we've entered into for a lot of us. I mean, certainly most millennials are employed and, have jobs and whatever. But I think I remember when I went to Oregon State at orientation, one of the speakers mentioned something like, for every 3 engineering graduates that we're going to have, there's one spot. There's one engineering position.
And the more automation and technology takes over, the fewer those jobs are there.
Yeah. I saw this thing online that I think summed it up really well, where it was like, go to college so you can get a degree so you don't end up flipping burgers. And then, being unemployed after college. What, you think you're too good to flip burgers? And it was just like, yeah. I mean, I think that's one thing I don't like the quote unquote system does is there's lots of work that it devalues.
Right.
And I'm of the position that like, if it's worth paying someone to do it, obviously has value. We've assigned monetary value to it. Now,
sure,
we can disagree on whether the work that a professional athlete or actor does probably shouldn't result in way more money than an educator, like a teacher or whatever. You look like you've got some thoughts.
Oh no, I'm listening. I'm feeling what you're saying.
But so it's the kind of thing where I think it's really easy to devalue people because of that, because we've gone through that system of like, get a good degree so you don't have to get the bad job.
Right.
As opposed to, get a degree so you can get the job you want, which, okay, to be fair, we also got that too, but it was that very like, you can be whatever you want to be. And I think that's a great sentiment, but like, maybe get like a business degree, just be safe.
Right. Yeah, it's tough. There's the whole idea of I'm going to study something and have something else to fall back on type thing, or put all your eggs in one basket and go for one thing.
Right.
And then there are a lot of people that are not gainfully employed enough to be able to even pay their debts and get by in a way that isn't extremely stressful,
Well, and I think it's really easy for things to become kind of like, one track or too many tracks to look at.
Sure.
Because I think with college and picking a major as a 18, 19-year-old kid, you're deciding what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And again, there's some movability with certain degrees have more universal applicability than others. Like, my wife has a sociology degree amongst other things, but that's way more applicable than my general music degree, because sociology affects a lot of different things.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, sociology is important, and I think people that understand sociology can do a lot of different things. I also know, as a lifelong musician, music is problem solving. And if you can figure out how to solve problems, you can kind of do anything.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, that's kind of problem solving is kind of the way that I teach ear training to my students when I'm trying to get them to really get into the habit of being able to identify things. So not just hearing a chord and knowing it's a chord, but, hearing a chord and being able to go, that's a C chord, as opposed to a G chord or whatever. But, going back to elementary school problem solving sheets, guess and check, baby. Just like for that's the one that I kind of default to, is that it's like, okay, it sounds like this. I'll try this. Okay, it wasn't that, but it sounded kind of close. So let me try this thing that's relatively adjacent. Or it sounds like this note. Okay, it sounds like as far from that note as it could possibly be. So I need to try something completely different.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that's a pretty reasonable statement. Music being problem solving. I mean, and I think you could probably find that true with a lot of, different skills. I imagine
Sure.
Visual art, you have to deal with that a bunch. I mean, heck, I was just watching a YouTube video about a couple of different movies where they had to kind of like the actor died, for instance, while they were shooting, and so
Right.
they had to figure out creatively a way to get the film to work even though they've only got half of the movie shot and the star has died. Or that I think art a lot of times can be that kind of problem solving, because it can feel like kind of tinkering with like a machine or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I'm awful at.
Mr. Callaway,
Yes.
how important is music to film and video storytelling?
I think it is so unbelievably important, just in terms of, and I guess I'll expand it into like music and sound.
Great.
But I think in terms of, a lot of times, I think music kind of acts as the sonic setting. In terms of, if you think about like watching a shot of, maybe there's like two actors and they're kind of standing in front of a field or whatever, and you're not really supposed to be focusing on that. You're supposed to be focusing on the actors, that they're talking or they're doing something. But that's what we're supposed to be focusing on. And so we're not really paying attention to like, what kind of trees are in the background or the little bird that flies ahead. But you strip all that away and you just put that scene in like a black void. Now it feels super weird because we're missing a really important sense. And I think that can be similar with music and sound. And I do want to kind of expand it to sound, because sometimes the most impactful music is no music.
Right.
You can have these really powerful scenes that are accentuated by the music. You think of like the Jaws theme, or Psycho, the violins just going for all the shrill.
Right. Yeah, minor seconds and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah.
And you take that score out of the intro to Jaws, and it's just, you're just moving through water.
Right.
You take it out of Psycho, it just feels like a weird snuff film. And so I think those choices are really impactful and important. And I think they in and of themselves can be really inspiring to musicians and getting people interested in doing music who maybe weren't. But it is so fascinating, because I think it can get undervalued as a part of that storytelling, because it generally does kind of get felt like the setting, but sometimes it is that main focus. It's that thing that's memorable. I've heard some film composers talk about, if people notice the music, then I've done my job wrong. With that
Right.
idea of like, this is just to accent the mood at night. And I love that kind of mindset of thinking about it, of just,
Sure.
especially as a guitar player who his inclination is to always be heard.
Fill
Always
everything.
Yeah, right at the front, all the notes. So that idea of like, lean back,
The
hold
space,
back.
yeah.
It's one that I constantly need to remind myself and train myself to get better with.
It's a Miles Davis quote. The music is
Yeah.
the space between the notes,
Well, yeah, I mean, there was, because at least kind of how I really got into really being super passionate about music was through video games, and how music was kind of a storytelling facet of that, where, when I got really into Kiss, I had heard them a couple of times before. I think specifically once, like on a road trip with my aunt, it was playing in the car and probably playing on my Game Boy or something. I wasn't really paying attention, but I was like, sounds good. But it was a Tony Hawk skateboarding game. It was Tony Hawk's Underground, that they had a couple of Kiss songs on the soundtrack, and then they had this bonus level you could unlock after you beat the game that was kind of like out on the out in the outback in Australia, but it was like set up like just this big like Kiss concert festival thing. And as a 13-year-old kid, like, the songs grabbed me, and I was like, okay, this is cool. And then that video, and so then I went and got Kiss Alive, and heard the Black Diamond solo, and that was like, I want to do that. That's amazing. I want to play the guitar. I want to do that. And that all happened from just the fact that I got Tony Hawk's Underground on the GameCube for my birthday when I was 13. So I think it can be that kind of driver, even when it's not driving the main focus of like a story or a medium. It can still be that. It can still emerge from that as the main driver for someone's enjoyment of a thing.
Yeah.
I remember. I remembered a thing that when I was kind of thinking about that question, I remembered a thing I'd written down. Was I kind of described it as it's like MSG for storytelling.
Okay.
You can still get by without it. Like, books exist.
Right.
Books don't have music. They don't need music. Like, they get by fine. But when you get like a really good score on a film, it's just that thing that takes it from like, this tastes good to like,
It makes it
I could
epic.
eat that. Yeah, I could consume this all day.
Well, and then you can hear it just with the music without the film, and you're just like you're imagining what you saw in the film.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, for sure. Yeah, there are those scores that are really really powerful, and even just again the kind of idea, like I love the idea of composing for that kind of stuff, because I think after so many years of growing up as a guitar player and just kind of writing whatever I wanted to write, which was usually just rock songs, I've really loved that idea of kind of composing to a specific end. It was something that when I was a kid, doing like creative writing, I always hated the kind of restrictions.
Sure.
But, as I've gotten to be a better guitar player and a better musician, those restrictions can be really, really inspiring, because now it's like I have to figure out how to do this, and I've basically eliminated these things as options because whatever I'm trying to write for won't work. That won't work for that.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's super important, because it is as important a setting for the scene as I would argue the visual background is.
Yeah, arguably it is. I think the more senses that we're using when we're consuming any kind of art, the better it is.
Smell-o-vision,
the deeper
baby.
it is. Yeah, exactly. It's like the Spinal Tap, the sights, the sounds, the smells of rock and roll. You don't want the smells of rock and roll. That's
Yeah.
not a good thing.
No. No, you don't.
All right, can you tell us about your current projects and where you'd like to focus your energy over the next few years?
Yeah, I've recently been getting, kind of more and more into, like, most of my kind of musician career has tended to be like, really being in one band and one kind of creative outlet at a time. And I think I've gotten to a place where that still works for me, but when I come up with ideas that don't fit that vision at all, and
Right.
Can't be kind of compromised, but man, this thing's really cool and I don't want to just let it be dead on arrival. I've been trying to kind of dedicate some more time to writing some stuff like that. I've got a buddy from college, Ryan Zubietta, who I met up with once or twice recently to just kind of do some composing stuff, and just kind of as a very casual thing, stuff that probably record and maybe throw online, but playing it live probably not. But I definitely at some point would like to kind of write a solo album that
Cool.
could just kind of be whatever it wants to be.
Yeah, stylistically it can be a little varied.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So the solo album, I think you had
Yeah.
mentioned.
That's just kind of something rattling around the brain that
Would you have acoustic and electric on there? Would it be just you, or would you hire or get some guest musicians on there?
I think it'd probably be both electric and acoustic. I'm definitely much more comfortable as an electric player, but there's definitely things that I've written on the acoustic guitar that should stay on the acoustic guitar as opposed to writing it on the acoustic and then figuring it out on the electric. But yeah, then I'd probably, hire, because I can't play drums. I like the idea of doing all the bass parts myself, but I need to get better at the bass.
That's cool. I look forward to hearing that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Would you do an EP or a full album, or you see where it goes?
Yeah, I'll kind of, it's something that I hope is done within the next 5 years, but I don't anticipate it being like super imminent. So I would like to have like an album's worth of stuff, but if I write 12 songs and 4 of them are pretty good and the rest of them I'm not really feeling, then I can do an EP. Like,
Sure.
Just kind of
Right on.
come what may.
There you go. What are one or two memorable stories from your music career so far?
There's like the very first Mr. Pink show we played was at this house party that was just kind of nuts. And I won't go into too much detail on that, but it was very, very cramped, and just like in a neighborhood in North Portland that we got the cops called on us because one of the people at the party had gone next door and like knocked on the door and was just pestering the neighbors, and so they called the cops, and so we got kind of shut down in the middle of our set. So I definitely remember that. There were a couple of black market bargain shows we did at the Whiskey in Hollywood. There was a summer where, so at that time, so Nathan was still in that band, and he's originally from San Diego, as was our drummer at that time. So I went down for a summer, I think this was 2014, and worked at a day camp with Nathan, and then we were playing kind of shows around. We Man, we played this show at the venue was Mike's backyard. It was just a dude's barbecue party that, I think he found us, like, I think we found him on Craigslist or something. So it was one of those things that we went into and it felt super sketch, but then we got there and it was pretty chill and, good food. But the shows we played at the Whiskey, the first one we did, that was a pay for play thing, so we had to get tickets and sell them. But we were able to get a bunch of people to come up from San Diego to make the drive up because it was on the weekend. My mom and sister actually flew down for that one too, which was really fun. But yeah, it was a really fun show. We had the place packed. We met some other really cool musicians. There was a band, the Aviators, that we met, who they're out of Bakersfield, who, if you like that kind of straight ahead rock and roll, they're definitely a band to check out. Yeah, we met their bass player in the green room upstairs before either of us did our sets, and we just started talking, and it was just kind of like that scene in Step Brothers where Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly just kind of immediately, like, without the weeks of tension, but as they've kind of come together and realized all these common interests they have, and they're just like, do we just become best friends? Yup. It was one of those things where it was up there and just kind of doing the casual, like, hey, what band are you in? Oh, I'm in this band. And you? I'm in that band. Oh yeah, right. What kind of stuff do you guys do? Oh, we do like rock and roll stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, we do too. Like, what kind of stuff? Who are your inspirations? And it's like, oh, these guys, these guys, these guys. Me too. Really? Yeah, you wanna come camping with us next week? Where are you guys gonna do it? Dan's backyard. Like, it was just so much fun. They're a great group of guys. The second one we did, we sold hardly any tickets because it was the end of August and it was on a Sunday. But we met a guy who had played guitar for George Clinton briefly, and he dug our set, which was super cool.
Yeah.
So I definitely remember that. There was a show we played in Corvallis that was just kind of this big outdoor kind of party thing with a bunch of students, kind of at the end of midterms, and everybody's going wild and crazy. And that was our first show with our bass player at that time, Austin Moon. It was his very first show with us, and as we're kind of finishing up that last song, we're kind of hammering on that chord and letting it ring out, the dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, just kind of letting everything, the big kind of build up before that last hit. And so, I'm like slamming on my guitar, and I kind of look back behind me, and, Austin has gone from playing his bass to just ripping the strings off of it, which I wouldn't want to do that on a guitar, and those strings are like so little. And on the bass, and it was kind of, he was kind of bouncing it from a string a little bit as he was like trying to rip it, just kind of letting gravity do the work. So I just kind of turned and I was like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. And I just made like the dumbest faces. I looked back and it was just floored. But it was like there were probably a couple hundred people there, and everybody was just having a great time and unwinding. And I'll definitely remember that for a while. That one was pretty fun. And recording our EP was really fun. We did that over at Rex Post Studios with Brent and Houston, who were phenomenal guys. And that was the first big recording experience that I had that was in like a good studio.
Yeah.
and not like someone's living room.
Right.
Or their garage. So working with them was a lot of fun.
Did you get it mastered there as well, or send
Oh
it
no,
somewhere
we
else?
got it mastered by Kevin Hahn. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, no, he did a great job with that too. It was like recording it was a blast, and getting back the the kind of the unmastered tracks after they got mixed was really cool. And then sent them off to Kevin, and then they came back, and it was just like, oh, like now they pop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So what are some books, artists, musicians, photographers, creative people that you would recommend people check out?
Yeah,
Anything that comes to mind?
I don't read as often as I should anymore.
Because you've learned so much.
Yeah, there's
I don't know.
no more reading to be done. No, not at all. Maybe just my attention span has just vanished. But I really liked George Orwell. I've had a lot of fun reading his stuff, especially when I was a teenager and kind of finally starting to understand political stuff when reading Animal Farm and kind of understanding the allegories that that's making and kind of having that moment of like, oh, this is talking about this, but it really means this. You know, that kind of sensation with a you know, more nuanced topic than like the Bolshevik Revolution and whatnot. I really liked 1984 as far as books go. You know, in terms of reading, I tend to really just kind of, not textbook reading, but, you know, it's a lot more of that just kind of reading on a topic thing, you know.
Sure, yeah.
Not as much tied into a story, which I love stories, but that's the kind of reading that I've defaulted into. You know, I really like video essays like that people will do on YouTube. Lindsay Ellis does these great pop culture ones, and usually they're rooted around like film or television or something like that, or just the kind of minutia of culture, and especially how it has advanced and evolved in the 21st century. That if you're into needlessly in-depth analyses of, you know, just kind of any movies, like Disney movies, or she had like a 9-part series on examining like the Transformer movies from all these different kind of theoretical standpoints, and they're fascinating. Like, I didn't really enjoy those movies, were not for me, but watching or listening to her kind of critiquing them, I've really enjoyed.
That's fun. I like that.
Oh yeah, I did already mention Rex Post, but
okay.
You know, Brent and Houston are great, and you should check out anything and everything they do. Photographers, we just did a photo shoot with Scotty Fisher in Sleeper Studios, and that was excellent. You know, you can find those on our social media, and I think a lot of them came out really well. Paul Brown, who you might know.
Of course.
Yeah.
I interviewed him for the podcast.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you all know then. But yeah, he did the photos at my wedding, and
nice.
Actually the very first show we played at that house show, Bad Ellie was on that bill too.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so, you know, he's got I think he's also in a Dokken cover band.
He is, yeah.
Okay, cool. I wasn't sure if that was still going or not.
Yep.
I love that exists. You know, again, kind of going back to video game music, Koji Kondo, who has done so much of like the Mario music and the Zelda music.
Okay.
It's like if people are playing through any of those games, it's like, you know, just sit for a minute and just like listen to the music, because it's unbelievably fascinating. And there's actually a YouTube channel called 8-Bit Music Theory that I've become a huge fan of, because it's basically he analyzes different musical concepts through the lens of video game music, but then he'll also examine kind of specific questions, you know, like what makes Mario music fun? Why does it sound fun? You know, and breaks it down with, like, you know, it's a lot of syncopation, which it feels lively and stuff, and a lot of the melody notes do these big jumps and whatever, which fits because Mario's jumping all around. And again, just that idea of really putting that deliberate intention and thought behind the thing, where it's not like he had this song that then Nintendo was like, hey, we need a piece of music for this Mario game, and he was just like, oh, I've got this one sitting on the shelf. It was like, no, it was written specifically around that idea
for those scenes and that stuff.
Yeah. And I just have such an unbelievable respect for people who can do that so well, because I don't think it's easy, but I do think it's really fun to try.
Yeah. It's incredible. Yeah.
Find out more at artmedianorthwest.com. ARTMEDIANW.com.